Hello, I'm Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com. Today I'm talking with you about why Nelson Mandela didn't die in prison and why it matters. I'd like to start with a quote that most of you may remember. It comes from Mark Twain, and he said, "The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Some of us remember that Nelson Mandela did pass away in the 1980s when he was still incarcerated. And I've talked about this before. A lot of people have talked about this before. It's really not that new an item, but I think what's becoming interesting is now that he has passed away, for some of us again in 2012, a lot of people are feeling that weird sense, kind of like deja vu, but a little different, because when Nelson Mandela died back in the 1980s, there was a lot of hubbub. It was a big deal because his family got involved because of the circumstances of his death and just what happened afterwards. A lot of people were very emotional about it. And I think, not to say that they aren't now, I'm just saying it was quite memorable and not one of those little mistakes of, well, surely you got it mixed up with someone else. No, did not get it mixed up with someone else. So the reason I'd like to bring this to your attention today is because there is a mechanism behind both this so-called Mandela Effect, where people say, didn't he die before? It's very strange that he came back to life. And it's also known as the alive again effect, because it's not just Nelson Mandela. This has been reported with a number of other, not just celebrities, but people in people's families and extended circles. And it's been happening for decades. In fact, longer than that. In fact, it's been happening for millennia. So this is one of those phenomenon that, fortunately for us, we live in a time now when we can, thanks to science and scientific discoveries and experiments, start putting two and two together, such as the amazing and exciting work of physicist, UC Berkeley's physicist Raphael Bousso, who has come up with a theory to explain why the Higgs boson, for example, has such a huge effect on things without having the phenomenal weight and mass that one would expect. It was a big surprise. But when Raphael Bousso puts forward and presents his model of the holographic multiverse, that's like putting two things together, holographic universe and parallel universes together. And when he does that, and he says this is a very possibly strong contender for what's going on in our universe as a whole, and it's also being backed up from other scientists who are doing work with some of the data from the cosmic radiation at the time of the Big Bang. And so there has been a lot of scientific confirmation that, in fact, when you look far enough back at what you might think of as the baby pictures of the Big Bang, when it first exploded and this whole universe came into being, if there was such a thing as a holographic multiverse, we would expect to see some of the energy imprint of those external universes to ours at that time of the Big Bang. And in fact, we do. This was predicted and also observed. And that was the work of theoretical physicist Laura Mersini-Houghton at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and also Carnegie Mellon's professor Richard Holman. And all this was done with the European Space Agency's Planck telescope. So this is all very wonderful research, but you might be wondering, what does this have to do with me? Well, what this has to do with you is that what happens in the quantum realm does not stay in the quantum realm. It's kind of like Las Vegas. People wish that what happens in Vegas would stay in Vegas. That's not always the case. Physicists also were really wishing and hoping that this quantum weirdness would stay in the quantum realm and not be sneaking out and observed on all levels. But scientifically, we aren't observing it on all levels. We now have fields of research, not just quantum biology, but we also have quantum statistics, quantum astronomy, and we're seeing the so-called spooky action at a distance, which is another way to refer to entanglement, on the macroscopic scale. We're seeing it in diamonds that you can hold in your hand physically. And of course, the reason for this race forward to demonstrate quantum effects and properties on the macroscopic scale has a lot to do with industry and the race to build these quantum computers that are coming out right now. But back to our story about Nelson Mandela. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. This is a statement that has been popularized by Carl Sagan, and what that means in reference to what we're talking about today is, okay, so if we're saying basically, that you can occasionally cross from one parallel universe to another, thanks to the fact that they're all connected. And we can actually travel, for whatever reason, from a reality where we know for sure, we heard about Nelson Mandela passing away in the 1980s, to one in which now he just recently passed away, December 2012, then we should be expecting to see this a lot. So prove it. Okay, this is a tough thing to prove, but there is evidence, again, thanks to research done this time at the University, Emory University. And this is researchers Ulrich Neisser and Nicole Harsh. What they wanted to show, and they were really on top of it, they wanted to do a study of what's known as a flashbulb memory. This happens at the time of something amazingly significant, such as the death of Kennedy or Princess Diana, or in this case, in their research, the Challenger space shuttle explosion. They were right on the mark. As soon as that happened, they rushed out and started doing surveys of their students, asking them to record with their own handwriting a journal entry of what they were doing, where they were, what was happening when they heard the news about the Challenger space shuttle explosion. And then they came back to these same individuals 2.5 years later to compare what people had written down with what they remembered very clearly, because people are very clear about where they were, what they were doing at pivotal points in history. And with great confidence, many students asserted that they had been somewhere very different than what they had written in their own handwriting. And one student remarked, "That's my handwriting, but that's not what happened." So once again, you could say, well, that's anecdotal, maybe, but there are increasing numbers of studies to show that what we would expect to see when we've got a quantum effect happening on the macroscopic scale is superposition of states. In other words, you'd expect sometimes you would have a little bit of that crossover that you definitely see on the quantum microscopic scale on our macroscopic scale. You would see things like an ever-increasing placebo effect, where people are starting to get better just when they're told you are in the placebo group, and sometimes people improve in that group. So why does all this matter? It matters because kindness matters, and this is something that I've talked about a lot before. Often we have different memories, different childhood memories, different memories of eyewitness accounts of what supposedly happened and took place. Keep in mind that it's very possible that not only are you remembering something different than what now in the current reality that you're in actually happened, but other people might be too. And this is very much a part of the alternate history phenomenon that we would expect to see as living in the quantum age. So these are great thoughts to think about. I want you to think about how to be kind, how to bring your best possible self into this current reality, which brings me to my favorite question of all, which is how good can it get? And keep asking that question for yourself and the world. Until next time, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com.